welcome everybody to today's Capstone Defense. I'm very pleased to welcome into the room Alyssa Esparaz, who will be defending her Master of Communications Management capstone, which was research conducted under the supervision of Professor Mark John Stewart, industry professor in our department, who is present. You can see him. Mark, maybe say hello.
Hey, everyone, good morning. Good luck, Alyssa.
Very good. And her second reader, Dr. Terry Flynn, director of the program.
Hello, everybody.
Very good. I'll just give you the rules of the road. Very straightforward. Alyssa has approximately 25 minutes to present. If you go a little over or a little under, not a problem. Either way, after that, we will have 2 rounds of questions. The first round will begin.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. The first round will begin with her supervisor, Professor Stewart. Then we'll go to her second reader, Dr. Flynn. And I have the right to ask a question as chair of the session, should I wish to. Once that round is complete, we'll go for a second round of questions in the same order. After that, we will open up questions to the gallery. So family members, classmates, friends, you're all invited to participate in the question period, should you wish to, or you can make a comment in support or appreciation. We don't like the other kinds of comments. Without further ado, one more piece after that. Then I will put everyone in a room, including Alyssa, for I don't know, about 5 minutes while the committee deliberates about the status of her score and how she did during the defense. After that, I will welcome everyone back, and we shall have the result. And that should be just before the hour. So please don't leave when I put you in the room because you'll then miss the announcement afterwards. Without further ado, it's 8:34. Alyssa, you have about 25 minutes to present. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to sharing my capstone with all of you. As you can see on the title, my capstone is about the value of communications and PR to Canadian charities focused on international development. And as most of you would know, I spent the first 8 years of my career in charity communications, and it's something I'm very proud of, something that was a real joy for me to start my career in. And it was a joy and privilege to send my capstone project with charity communicators. And I hope really shine a light on the important work that they do, the challenges that they face, and of course, the immense potential that they have to continue making an even greater impact. And so this is where we are headed over the next 25 minutes or so. I'll share some background and a little bit about my literature review. I'll highlight my research questions and methodology, share the research findings, of course, which is the meat of the presentation, and then conclude with some recommendations. And ultimately, what I really hope you take away from this presentation is the vital importance of communicators to charities to drive multifaceted impact for their organizations and also just for the broader issues that their organizations address. And you'll see as we get into the results section, I specifically talk about communicators in a few specific functions as ways that they really drive impact. So to set the context, there are about 85,000 registered charities in Canada. There aren't exact numbers on international development charities specifically, but I will say it's small. One number I found is that about 1.4% of Canadian charity expenditures were outside of Canada in 2023. So it's a pretty small subset of the charity sector in Canada. That said, Canada in the international development space has, a focused and significant impact over the years. For example, Global Affairs Canada has a longstanding identity with its feminist international development policy, and over the years, Canada's international assistance envelope has invested significantly in international development, including through grants to many Canadian charities. And I think the 2 key context themes that I'd highlight as we get started here are these 2 themes here, trust and transformation. Charities really do enjoy a high degree of trust, and that continues to be true even even today, in the midst of what I would say is an overall kind of eroding of public trust in institutions, I think that we're all seeing and feeling around the world. Charities still enjoy this really high degree of trust. The public really trusts charities. And so the question becomes then, how do communicators and charity communicators specifically leverage this trust in this environment of transformation, which is the second theme. And I think we all know we're undoubtedly in a pivotal moment. And our Prime Minister highlighted that in his recent high-profile speech at the World Economic Forum. Canada's position on the global stage is at a bit of a crossroads, and this is undoubtedly affecting Canadian international development charities, the communicators who work there, and how they're thinking about their work. And so both of these things, I think, really set the stage for this project and the themes that we'll talk about today. So my literature review was focused on two key areas. The first was social theory and communications. And this body of literature was one that has captured my attention throughout the MCM program and it really highlights the potentials for communicators to advance social good. So everything from how communicators can and have advocated for social inclusion, be it women's rights, racial discrimination, workers' rights over the years, to highlighting Global South scholars and who bring really diverse perspectives to the practice and to the field. So, for example, one piece of literature from scholars based in sub-Saharan Africa highlights the importance of storytelling in subverting oppressive power structures, which is something that I would argue is something that charity communicators are doing every day in their work. Another example is Grunig, who of course is a pillar when it comes to scholars in the communication field. Some of his more recent work really highlights how two-way symmetrical communication promotes social inclusion. And he wrote a piece very recently about working with poor small-scale farmers in South America and how communications work impacted social inclusion there. And so that is social theory and communications. The second part of my literature review focuses on charity PR and communication specifically, and existing work on the PR and communications functions within charities, highlighting communicators' multifaceted roles and functions within charities. And so I will say a lot of that work was focused on charities in the UK or the US. There's not a ton focused on Canadian charities, so it was great for my project to be able to highlight that, and that was a specific choice that I took. And again, you can see that the theme of the value of communicators to be strategic and multifaceted in the face of challenge and change is something that was pulled through the thread of this part of my literature review for sure. So no matter what they're doing, whether it's crisis response, stakeholder engagement, strategic leadership, or otherwise, you see this quote at the bottom of the screen here that communications professionals are juggling several strategic functions and types of communication to respond to an increasingly challenging charity landscape. So these were my research questions, and the research questions really split the project into current state and then potential. What is happening already? What's happening now? What are the challenges that communicators are facing now? And then what could happen? Where are the areas of opportunity? And so research question one you see is all about like how and to what extent are communicators currently making an impact and successfully demonstrating and driving their organization's impact and outcomes. Then on the flip side of that too, what are the challenges that they're facing? And then research question two looks at what opportunities exist to better leverage the communications function within charities to demonstrate value, build trust, and drive impact and outcomes. And so, of course, to answer these research questions, I conducted some primary research, and that consisted of both surveys and interviews. I had 28 completed surveys that were completed online via Lime Survey, and then I conducted 12 open-ended interviews over Microsoft Teams. And these interviewees were recruited through the survey. So these were survey participants who indicated interest in doing an interview at the end of their survey, and then I reached out to them afterwards. And all of these participants were senior leaders or communications professionals working for a Canadian international development charity, and that was defined as a registered charity that had international programming. And I'll also highlight here that charities are distinct from not-for-profits within Canada, and so that really brought this, focus and scope and clear definition, as just looking at organizations that had that specific registration with the government of Canada. All right, and so getting to the good part, I will give you some insights into who the participants were and then speak to these 4 buckets of themes that really emerged. So communicators as storytellers and fundraisers, connectors or boundary spanners, strategic leaders, and then finally as advocates. And so here first is some insight into my research participants. Out of the 28 survey respondents, most worked for what I classified as medium charities. And so that's on the 2 charts on the left, the orange that you see there. And then a good chunk work for smaller charities. That's the darker blue segment. And just a handful worked for those really large charities within Canada that are just, a few of those exist, I would say. Of more than 100 staff or $20 million or more of annual revenue. The participants were very diverse in terms of their titles and level within the organization, which I was really pleased with. I think that gave a really diverse view of the role in the sector. And the issues that these charities address were, varied as well. So there was various areas of focus, whether that was global poverty alleviation, global health, education, political advocacy, or infrastructure development. And also, this isn't on the slide, and we'll get into it a little bit more later, but an interesting note about the participants is that it was also about a 50-50 split on whether their role was fully dedicated to communications or not. So about half of them responded in the survey and said, my role is 100% communications. And then the other 50% indicated that they shared their function with other responsibilities and functions within the org. By far, these 2 functions, storytelling and fundraising, emerged as the #1 role of charity communicators today in both the surveys and the interviews. So I think that comes as no surprise that charity communicators are tasked with telling the organization's story with the goal of raising funds. And so 8 out of 12 of the interview participants specifically mentioned fundraising as a key part of their roles, objectives, or functions, with some going as far to indicate that that is the #1 way that success in their work is measured, is how much money did you raise this year? And then when asked about their effectiveness at various types of work, you can see on this chart on the right that survey respondents rated themselves as most effective at storytelling and fundraising, with stakeholder engagement rounding out the top 3 as well. So just getting into this a little bit more and digging in, again, it's not surprising to anyone that storytelling is an important part of any communicator's work, and specifically charity communicators and international development charities specifically. I think for international development charities especially, this is important because the work can seem so far away and the issues can seem so far away to the audience of these charities. And so communicators help to bring that work closer. They help to, as this quote from the literature says, legitimize the organizations, the work, the issues in the eyes of stakeholders. You know, Oftentimes these organizations the impact that they're having is happening like on the literal other side of the planet. And so being able to take that and make it relevant to someone here in Canada is the kind of magic that international development charity communicators do. And I will say I'll highlight, and that's highlighted on the bottom of the slide there, even though this is an area of high effectiveness, it was also identified as an area of opportunity, particularly in bringing program participants closer and including program participants in firsthand storytelling. Many of the interview participants spoke about this and highlighted this as a way to diversify narratives and shift power, which again was a theme in the literature review and that idea of social theory and communications, particularly, from the sub-Saharan African scholars I spoke about earlier, talking about how it allows for an introduction of different narratives within the story to help shift power. Those two themes definitely both came up in the interviews and in the literature as a key opportunity. So that's something that I would highlight in this bucket. Okay, speaking about fundraisers, again, this won't surprise you that this is a priority for charities and thus their communicators. Communicators indicated that much of their work contributes to this function, as I highlighted a couple slides back. However, I will say this also emerged as a challenge because fundraising and communications aren't the same thing. They aren't the same, skills, and they definitely aren't the same function, even though the same people are often doing both things, particularly at smaller charities. And so this lack of the ability to focus on one or the other definitely came up in the interviews. And this is also highlighted in the literature. So Sue et al., they warn against charities reducing their relationship with the public to one that's just between sellers and buyers, and argue that this one-dimensional approach may actually erode that trust that we talked about was so important for charities and erode wider public engagement with humanitarian issues. And so this is really where communicators can come in with that more multifaceted stakeholder engagement approach, supporting the work of fundraisers. And I would say, building that foundation for fundraisers by raising public awareness for the issues. And we'll speak about that again in a few slides when I talk about communicators as advocates. Okay, the next bucket is charity communicators as connectors, which I'm using the word connectors as a more accessible way to talk about communicators as boundary spanners, which is a key theme in communications literature. It puts forward the concept of boundary spanning as this uniquely valuable part of the communications functions work. And I would say that this definitely came forward in the interviews as well. Participants highlighted this by using words like being a hub or a focal point that resources various functions within the organizations, connects stakeholders both internally and externally, and resources people with aligned messaging on key issues. Another key pattern that kind of lends itself to this is that when I would ask interview participants to describe their role or a typical day, they would say this kind of classic, there's really no typical day in my role. My work is really varied and diverse. I do a lot of different things. And so I think that again speaks to just the multifaceted kind of boundary spanning aspects of the charity communicator's role. And interestingly, the literature connects this boundary spanning role to ethics and empowerment and social justice, as you can see at the bottom of this slide. And again, I think that's of unique interest to charity communicators who are often thinking about these things very specifically. And so, as they think about themselves as boundary spanners, and then also people that are putting forward empowerment and social justice, there's a really clear connection between those two things in the literature. Of course, when asked about challenges, the most common ones that came up were resource constraints and competing priorities amongst participants. And this is common for all communicators. I won't try and argue that this is unique to the charity communication space by any means. But I would say that particularly at charities, budgets are even more constrained. And, one of the participants talked about, we want to be making sure that as much of the money and as much of the resources go to our programs and go to, go overseas as possible. And so because of that, I think there's increased pressure on resources and resource constraints at international development charities. And so when you pair that reality with the transformative landscape and changing environment that we're all working in, this really highlights this need for a strategic approach that communicators both need and can help to bring. And so the interview participants talked about this a lot. One thing they talked about was wanting to bring more strategy to their storytelling. And so, earlier on in that slide, when I talked about storytelling still both being a high area of effectiveness and an area where they really want more, this is one thing. They wanted to be more strategic, to tell stories over time and really invite their audience into a story that, spans the year, for example, instead of just like blasting out random email stories ever so often. They talked about wanting to upskill and adopt technology to increase capacity, but be really strategic about that, especially when it came to AI, which is obviously the hot topic of the day. They talked about wanting to adopt it in a way that mitigates concerns about ethics, misinformation, and credibility. They also talked about connecting their work to the strategic plan, and survey respondents were asked specifically about this, and 96% of them, so all but one, said they were familiar with their organization's strategic plan. 60% of them said they were effective or very effective at driving forward its goals. And only one interview participant really talked about or showed direct measurement against their strategic plans, but citing specific KPIs related to the plan. And so I think this is another area of opportunity where communicators can have that really specific place within the strategic plan and have objectives and KPIs to measure against it. And finally, I would just say I think the basic strategic work of prioritizing and knowing how to say yes and no to the right things is something that's really important for charity communicators to bring focus and effectiveness to their work. Charity communicators are very passionate people. They want to do it all. They want to be able to do everything they can for the mission and for their organizations. They sometimes brag about doing it all. That's something that came up in interviews. But the value of their work, as we all know, will come in what they can do effectively, and that needs a little bit of strategic focus for sure. Finally, this last bucket is charity communicators as advocates. And this to me is where charity communicators can really shine when they're given the opportunity. Because these are such passionate people who work for organizations with such a clear mission-driven identity, and they have the skills and tools to share a clear message and to really amplify that mission, I think this is just such an area of opportunity to shine. But you can see on the chart on the left that there's a gap here. Most of the charity communicators that I spoke to think that they should influence public opinion about the issues that their organizations address, but they don't feel that they're currently doing so. And so there's a gap and an opportunity here. We're living in an environment where there is widespread cuts to international development funding at a policy level in the US. USAID has been completely dismantled. And even within Canada, Canada's international assistance envelope was cut significantly this year. This Canada First sentiment has generally turned public attention inwards instead of towards global needs. And all of these things were happening as I was doing my research and interviews. So it was definitely top of mind for my interview participants. I loved this quote from interview participant number 9, and I just want to read it because I think it's so well said. They said, "We've become a little bit more mean-spirited. We're against the immigrant, against the foreigner. And in a world like that, why should someone care to donate $1 for Sudan or Somalia or Palestine? If I can answer that question cogently and convincingly, that would be my top priority as a communications professional in this field." I just thought that was said so eloquently in what the role of a charity communicator really is at its core, is how do we cut through the noise and the mean-spiritedness to remind people of the global needs and show them why they should care about what's happening somewhere halfway around the world. And so these are just a couple standout quotes on the screen, but it was a common thread throughout my interviews of interview participants talking about helping people and policymakers understand global needs in the midst of increasingly protectionist mindsets and meeting Canadians where they're at and connecting them to care about these global needs. And so all of this brings me to my recommendations. First of all, for the communicators themselves, I think the first one around storytelling, really highlighting like, this is your bread and butter, keep it up. This isn't going anywhere. Keep up the strong approach and also invest in opportunities to grow channels, audiences, and tactics. And I think advocacy, moving to the second one, is really one of those spaces where this can grow. Like I was just talking about, advocacy really emerges as a space where charity communicators can shine and expand their storytelling into new spaces, such as with media or with government. And finally, when we talk about strategy, this is about getting really, really clear about your yes and your no to be as impactful as possible in the midst of changing landscapes. And um, I think my encouragement to any communicator, but especially to communicators in the international development charity space, is that doing everything and burning yourself out isn't going to help anyone. I know you're really passionate. I know you really care. And part of that is learning to know what to say no to. And then for charity leaders, I think they really need to enable that strategic focus by investing in communicators who have dedicated roles and objectives within your strategic plan. And the return on investment in this will be as multifaceted as communicators themselves are. At the end of this project, and as I kind of conclude this work, I feel as passionate as ever that your communications function is and can be the thing that connects the dots for your stakeholders, both internally and externally, and really pluses up the sophistication of your organization's mission and message, to be strategic, to really plus up that advocacy space for your organization. Charity communicators are passionate people, as everyone who works for a charity is. And what communicators do is unleash and amplify that passion for the greater good. And so that is my pitch to charity leaders to really invest in your communications function. And with 1 minute left, I just want to finish off with a few thank yous, basically to the people who are on this call today and a few others, to MCM faculty who've been a part of this journey, and especially, of course, to my Capstone supervisor, Professor Mark John Stewart, my second reader, Dr. Terry Flynn, and our Capstone course instructor and my defense chair today, Dr. Alex Sévigny. Thank you to all of you for all your guidance and support. To my MCM cohort and classmates, I'm just so thankful to have been on this journey with you. Thanks to those of you who are here today and who are watching later. It's just a privilege to know each one of you and work alongside each one of you. To my research participants, I really hope that I did some justice to the work that you do each day. You do such important work, and I'm so grateful for it. And so thank you for the opportunity to just highlight it. And finally, some personal thank yous to my parents, to my brother, family, friends, and loved ones who have supported me every step of the way on this MCM journey. I am very happy to not have to give you updates on this project anymore, and thank you for listening to them. So with that, I will conclude and say thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you for an excellent presentation, Alyssa. It's a very engaging and insightful. Much appreciated. I now immediately turn it over to your Capstone supervisor, Professor Mark John Stewart, to ask the first question, followed by Dr. Terry Flynn.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. And congratulations, Alyssa. It's been a really interesting project to work on with you. As you know, I'm very involved with a charity based here in Canada that does work internationally, particularly in West and South Africa. And I've had some interesting journeys over the years of trying to make the case in terms of, the challenges that we faced here, and trying to say, why is there also a mandate or prerogative for us morally for other reasons to support international charities. So this added a lot, I think, of really interesting insight to a key role, which is the communications component of engaging different types of stakeholder groups to support. So really well done, really interesting insights, and congrats on being this part of the journey. So let's get into my questions. There's a recurring thread in the MCM program about gaining a seat at the C-suite, and also you noted at the beginning of your presentation just this interesting time. Never mind the communicators getting to C-suite, but the communicators helping their organizations face the moment of a turn away from globalization in a lot of forms. Both economically, but also socially as well. To your point, funding's been reduced in Canada. Our Prime Minister Mark Carney has introduced a new thesis. The U.S. has slashed almost all the funding going through USAID. And yet here we are, a small group of Canadian charities trying to make the case for how to make a difference in this challenging world. So really timely, I think, that you're producing this capstone. I think it contains a lot of useful insights. So I want to start off just talking a little bit about measurement and impact. So one of the challenges communicators often face is tying the threads to outcomes for their organizations. You highlighted in particular kind of a natural connection between communications and fundraising. But were there any particular useful insights you have for communicators in general, or those working in charities, that you heard from your participants or found in your research in regard to making an impact-based case for the value of communications and ways to kind of demonstrate or measure that, to really tie into your last slide focused on the encouragement for organizations to fund communications more? Is there a way to strengthen that through demonstrating effective measurement and effective impact?
Yeah, for sure. I think overall and anecdotally, I will say, starting like more broadly, charity communicators and charities overall definitely struggle with measurement. And I think even anecdotally in my own experience, it was like, even how do we demonstrate the impact of our work as an organization, let alone as communicators, is something that is like overall an issue within the charity sector. I think going back to that idea of the strategic plan is something that is a real area of opportunity here, where, like I said, most of the research participants said, yep, I know our strategic plan. And then there was a little bit of a drop off in like, and I know how I'm making an impact within it, or I know what my KPIs are within it. I was really impressed with like the one interview participant who literally brought up the strategic plan and was like, here's our KPIs, and here is like the one that's assigned to communications. That was just one research participant out of the entire group who was able to do that. And so I think really getting to your point about the communications function being at that strategic C-suite level to really be a part of developing the strategic plan will help to put those measurement outcomes and put those objectives into that plan that hopefully the whole organization is measuring against. And so that I would say is like the key area of opportunity and something that's really important for communicators. This is across the board, obviously, but especially at charities. And yeah, I think as communicators get better at that, they will also get better at overall demonstrating the impact of not just their own work, but the charity's work. And that will only be a good thing for the people who like numbers and really want to see that growth over time.
That is a really interesting observation. And I think you're highlighting some low-hanging fruit, which is literally an organization, board, CEO, and others say, this is our plan, this is what we want to achieve. And the obvious thing to do would be like, let me connect my work to it. So as a recommendation, I think that's a really strong one. On that topic I mentioned earlier about the challenges to make the case between what's happening domestically, people are just challenged in general, like philanthropy has been challenged, and just our attention's fractured. And charity communicators have this task of trying to draw people's attention to something in particular happening in different parts of the world. Did you find any insights on excellent communications in a fractured, noisy environment, where you observe these communicators being able to do, or some of them do, an excellent job of focusing and sharpening attention on issues that may not have been at the forefront of people's minds or consciousness?
Yeah, I think one charity that I spoke to in particular, they clearly had invested and even like sought out specific grants for public um, engagement and public awareness uh, around the issues that their organization addresses. And so that for me was really interesting because it kind of um, helped to solve this resource constraint problem when they had a specific grant that was focused on like going into schools. I think it was for this particular organization, like creating a program to go into schools and educate kids about global issues. And so, um, when I was speaking to this one interviewee specifically, they were like, oh yeah, like I guess resource constraints aren't really an issue for us because we have like a specific grant that we got and a pocket of money that we need to use for this specific purpose. Um, and that was such a refreshing conversation because everyone else I was talking to was like, we're just like applying for money in the budget and all of that. And then this one person was like, yeah, this is just my job. Like my whole job is for this grant for this amount of time to do this work. And I just get to do my work freely because of that. So I think that was a really cool one to speak to. And I think really enabled them to do their work very with a, that focus that I talked about and with that excellence. And yeah, certainly I would say the standout kind of quotes, and I think what got me really fired up was this topic around like one of my participants specifically talked about like the cacophony of voices that are out in the world and just the noise that they feel like every day they're cutting through. And um, going back to that quote, I think on my slide about advocacy, um, yeah, just that how do I answer these questions for people is something that they're thinking about every day.
Excellent. I appreciate that. I'm always listening for insights because the organization that I've been very involved with, Parliament Squared, which Alex is familiar with as well, we primarily have built out a major project in a very small country called Liberia, which many people are not very familiar with here in Canada. But yet we've been able to create a compelling case around why people should be engaged and interested in it. So I think I would attribute a huge amount of our success to effective communications. So I do think there's an incredible opportunity to make things vibrant and bring them to life. I think we do have a consciousness that we are globally connected, notwithstanding some of the recent, political shifts away from globalization. So really good answers. I will turn the floor back to our chair.
Dr. Flynn.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Alex. First of all, congratulations, Alyssa. From day one, from our interview for admission into this program, you've expressed a great passion for this subject, and through the 3 courses that I've taught you, and that didn't go away. And so to be able to see this come together, pulling all aspects of the program into your research, really is the contribution in terms of what you're doing. So I want to be able to ask 3 questions: one on theory, one on methods, and then one on application. Right. So, you've talked about a lot of the theory that has been covered in traditional public relations theory: boundary spanning, advocacy, storytelling, strategy. What do you think your contribution in this research is to the scholarship and our understanding of communications, especially in the charity sector?
Yeah. It's a great question. I feel like there's a lot of pressure on that, but I'll I'll weave my way through it. I think definitely, again, I talked about like social theory and communication has really like captured my attention throughout the program. I think to your point, Terry, it's something that I've felt passionate about since the beginning, and that hasn't gone away. Um, and I think something that, was really interesting to me on the charity and PR side of my literature review was, and I didn't talk about it in my presentation, so I'll talk about it now, was this idea of cultural intermediation and like charity PR and comms as a cultural intermediary occupation. And to me, I think that that is something that's really important for charity communicators to see themselves as, that they don't, again, don't just see themselves as fundraisers or marketers or just people that work for their organization and only talk about like give money to my specific organization, but rather rise up about out of that a little bit more and talk about like these are the issues that my organization address and this is why this is important. I think that possibly communicators within charities are the only people within the organization who are allowed to do that. Of course, fundraisers need to be like, how much money are we raising for the organization so we don't go under this year? And marketers are like, how many clicks to our website are we getting? But communicators, I hope, get to be a little bit expanded outside of that and really see themselves as people who are impacting culture and society and pulling people in to think about these issues from a broader perspective. An example is like even just yesterday, I shared on my Instagram story a post from UNICEF about the war in the Middle East going on right now. And that post has nothing to do with donate to UNICEF or click on our website. It's just a post about like, hey, we should be thinking about kids in the midst of war. And that is something that we should be thinking about as a culture and as a society. And whoever made that graphic at UNICEF, that's what they were thinking about as a communicator. And so I would say, I think if anything comes out of my work, that is something that I'm really passionate about and that I would really want, charity communicators to really identify with as they see themselves in this work.
Yeah, I think that's an important nugget that you've identified and uncovered as well. And I think it's important, and not all communicators have that kind of cultural awareness to be able to rise to that level of brave or morally courageous kinds of communications as well. I'm going to change my path of questioning to and leave the data question or the methods question to Alex, because he loves to dive deep into that. What about, you spend a lot of time talking about advocacy, and even just in this last example about UNICEF, right? I mean, they're advocating for care of children in this. But most charities have limited capacity to even communicate, to storytell, right? And you talked about the divide between those that are, 50% of them are doing it on the side of their desk, where 50% are doing it sort of within their pocket. What ethical considerations should charities weigh when moving from communications into advocacy?
Mm. I mean, I think it is 100% it's a values choice, I guess. And I think that's where I would even just like bring it back to that strategic plan, which, we learned in Mark's class that the strategic plan comes from your values as an organization. And so what you're doing will come from the values that you have as an organization. And that's just a specific choice that you have to make that, hey, we care about the moral power of our voice, like you just said. And so I think the ethical consideration there is, absolutely like, who do we want to be in the midst of the transformative landscape that we're working in? And, I would say that these are ethical choices, even within the sector. I would even think about like in a world of declining government funding, for example, to international development, often you will feel that, if you're getting government funding as an organizations shouldn't feel this way, but often they do feel this way, that they then also have to be aligned with, all of the government's foreign policy or things like that. And so if a charity were to come up into a space where they feel that, they wanted to oppose a certain opinion of the government, but they also received funding from the government, I think that's a really interesting ethical dilemma that communicators and charity leaders face. And that is one of those times where you go back to your values and you say, who do I want to be in the midst of this? And so that's something that comes to mind when you're asking about like ethics in the charity space, is often you come up against like not just government, even like big name donors, like, hey, this big name donor votes in this way or has this particular policy opinion. And if I go against that, will they pull all their funding? What does that mean? And I don't think that there are actually clear answers to that, because losing a huge chunk of funding really affects people on the ground.
Right. I'll save my third question for the next round. So Alex, to you. Thanks, Alyssa.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. This was a pleasure to read and a pleasure to watch your presentation. It was really thoughtfully put together. And I think that from my perspective, that this is an understudied area, as you as you identified, right? And it ties into this bigger question of, do communicators perceive themselves as leaders, right? Because to be an advocate, you have to feel a sort of measure of leadership or measure of self-confidence or empowerment. So is there anything that came out of your research around that topic? Anything that you can infer from your participants' responses or your reading that you can shed some light on that notion of communicators as leaders?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind immediately is this idea of communicators as connectors, and those words like we're a hub or we're a focal point or we're a resourcing function within the organization. Those are almost like the shy communicator's way of being like, we lead, we tell people what to do. And it's kind of, I'm just thinking of this now as you're saying that, because um, communicators will always say that, like, oh, we're just here to resource people. We're here to give people what they need to be able to do their work. And I'm like, you're talking about leadership. You're talking about, equipping the organization to speak with an aligned message and an aligned voice on really key issues that the organization is facing. That is, to your point, Alex, takes a lot of confidence and takes a lot of self assuredness and self-awareness. And so that I would say is what comes up the most, is that um, communicators really serve as a foundation for marketers to be able to do their work, for fundraisers to do their work, and even for the executive team to, stand in front of governments and say what policy should look like.
It's a very nice way of putting it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Let's go to round two.
Excellent. So keep an eye on our time here. I think just one key last question for myself. So Alyssa, when you're doing a capstone or thesis, somewhat uniquely, you spend this time with a really deep dive into a topic, and it's on your mind in a substantial way, and you're processing through it. So my question for you is, as somebody who engages in this field and is, on a part of your career journey, how did this capstone experience generally, and specifically with the topic at hand, impact and influence you as a professional as you go forward? How are you changed?
To me, I think it is really, I feel, especially now ending off my MCM degree and just really thinking about communicators in this strategic leadership, professional way. Um, I get so excited about bringing that into the charity space. A lot of, myself included, a lot of communicators within the charity space kind of stumble upon it and just find themselves because they're like, you're good at talking, you're good at writing, you're now our communicator. And it's like, oh, and like I had that experience early on in my career, and that brought me to the MCM program. And so I think for me, I want to kind of go back into the charity space and really encourage other people who had my experience to maybe do the MCM program or something like that, to able to really kind of, yeah, just bring that increased strategic awareness and leadership to their work within the charity sector.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I can certainly vouch for the fact that there's an incredible opportunity for impact, right? And working in this space can be very meaningful. So I appreciate the contribution to it.
So I want to recognize that, when when you look at your capstone and you had a small sample size from your survey. You did a good job in terms of interviewing people, but what I think is missing a little bit is a little bit of framing around this is a small sector.
Mm-hmm.
So 28 people responding, if you're just looking at it on a pure end basis. So I think part of the framing is you've got to really be able to suggest that here's the end of this sector, right? So a 28 person response is good because it's not like others that get 200 and there's 6,000 people that work in that space. So I think that's an important thing to think about as well, right? Because some people, even if you were to present this in an applied manner, are going to say, "Oh, that's a that's a low survey response rate, right? Something's wrong with that. But just think about that. So you just said that, oh, maybe I'm going to be attracted back into this sector. And if a Canadian-based international charity hired you and gave you lots of money to attract you back to this position, based on your research and what you know now, what 2 structural changes would you recommend for the enhancement or to strengthen the role of communications?
2 structural changes. I mean, one would be definitely, it depends how much money I get and the budget that I get, but let's pretend that it's great. Would be definitely like hiring a dedicated communications professional, should I say an MCMer, who is focused specifically on this advocacy part of the role, with, media, like media relations came up as a big like gap, I would say, for everyone who talked, all of my interview participants. They were like, we know that people are interested in, there are bureaus that tell these stories and we just can't get to them and get the real stories to them. So that is, I think, a key area of opportunity. And then, also again, like that advocacy with policymakers and government. I think a lot of different types of professionals can occupy that role in that space, but I would argue for a communicator in that space. That's one. And then I think, yeah, having that, whether this is a change or a continued thing, is like having someone who really owns the message of the organization. And so, that's often the content marketing manager or someone like that, who maybe just reframing their role a little bit to be like, you're not just writing blog posts or putting social media posts out, you are owning the messaging and the story for the whole organization.
Right. Okay, thanks, Alex.
All right. Now I'm going to open it up to the gallery to see if anybody has any questions, comments, points of view. No? All right. Then what I will do, there seems to be a pact among people to not ask questions. Sometimes the most challenging questions come from the gallery. So I'm going to put everybody into a room except for myself, Professor Stewart, Dr. Flynn, and we will call. Oh, do we have something in the chat? Oh no, we just have. All right. Okay. So I'm opening the room.